Hello and welcome to the Daily Friend Show. We're bringing you our Friday week roundup. We'll be talking to you about the major news moments of the week and giving a bit of in-depth analysis to them. I'm joined here in studio by Marius. Roodt.
How's it, Gabriel?
How are you doing, Marius?
Right on you?
Second time in studio with him today.
Yeah.
Very good
Oh,
to
nice.
see you again.
You as well?
You look just like you did earlier.
So do you.
I think last time there was no camera, so now people can see how happy you really are.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Terence, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. How are you, Gabriel?
Good. There's Terence Corrigan, and here we have Gerbrandt Van Heerden.
Correct, my dear colleague.
Very good to see you. Very good to see you on the show. And let's start with you, with, I think, quite a heavy topic. I've sort of built it in my head as killing queers in Uganda, although that isn't sort of what's happened yet in a legalistic sense. That is what the law is now looking to make room for. Is that right?
So that is correct. A few months ago, Simon Lokodo, which is Uganda's ethics and integrity minister, announced that Uganda is in the process or is planning to introduce a new version of its Anti-Homosexuality Act, which includes the death penalty. And it is, in his words, he says it's the death penalty for homosexuality. So not just same-sex practices, but anyone who says he's gay or his behavior can be interpreted as gay. So that means if, you're guilty of that, then, your punishment will be death. However, the Ugandan government later on, a few weeks later, after a tremendous amount of international outcry and backlash, made an official statement saying that they're distancing themselves from Lokodo's comments, and that they are not planning on introducing the death penalty because the current punishments enshrined in Uganda's penal code is sufficient, and that is life imprisonment. So
we're not coming off a very high base here in terms of tolerance and open-minded future thinking. In terms of this international outrage that you speak to, where was South Africa in that?
Oh, well, I'm not exactly sure in this case, but I do know that South Africa has had a poor reputation in terms of fighting for LGBTQ rights on the continent. And I kind of understand the difficult position that the country is in, because South Africa wants to have good relations with its neighbors and its trading partners. So maybe doesn't want to push too aggressively for that. But on the other hand, you have to stand on principle, I believe. And as the only nation who, is progressive towards these type of issues, I think there is a personal moral responsibility that is on South Africa's shoulders. And then Uganda, Uganda is as bad as it gets on the continent. Simon Lokodo that I just mentioned, a few years ago, he banned a local LGBTQ organization from having a small private celebration of International Anti-Homophobia Day. And then he also was instrumental in trying to push for Uganda's health ministry to not hold a conference on key and priority populations, because he said that runs the risk of promoting dirty things such as homosexuality. And then also Rebecca Gdacha, who is she's the Speaker of Uganda at the International Parliamentary Union. She made comments as well when countries from the European side tried to push for a declaration on migrants and refugees to have LGBTQ people be included in that. She said that she and her country will withdraw from the IPU if these Western powers try to impose their beliefs on her and the continent. And so, unfortunately, Uganda, like I said, very, very hostile country for gay people. So international studies have also shown that the majority of people in Uganda believe that homosexuality is a Western phenomenon. And the majority of people in Uganda also believe that gay people should be treated as criminals. Only 20% in South Africa, at least. But that's still huge. But
20% is crazy.
It's crazy. But so the point that I'm trying to make is Africa is moving forward slowly, but there are some pockets that are especially dire for gay people, and South Africa, I believe, really needs to step it up.
Yeah, I suppose one of the challenges that we face is that if the rhetoric is that gayness is a Western thing, South Africa firstly has this problem of not criticizing its partners on the continent for pragmatic reasons, and then secondly for ideological reasons, some of which have to do with our politicians' attitude towards the West, which is often quite hostile. I remember one of our ambassadors or some sort of ambassadorial mission saying to the Venezuelans, we will support you in your war against the West.
We'll send soldiers.
We will send soldiers. We just, you send us the petrol and we'll send the soldiers. I mean, which is sort of another case of human rights abuses, really, us picking the wrong side.
Yes. But I have to say, I do think that's one thing as South Africans we can be proud of, is that we're the only country on the continent that allows same-sex marriage and so on. I think, I mean, as Harry says, 20% of South Africans think being gay is criminal, but at least, I mean, it's one of the things about living in a liberal democracy. It doesn't matter. Even if 80% of South Africans thought being gay is criminal, gay people should still be able to live their lives how they want. And I do think Southern Africa is actually doing pretty well. I mean, Botswana legalized homosexuality earlier this year. It's been decriminalized in Mozambique and Angola as well, I think, recently. So, I mean, as Harry says, there's still pockets of discrimination, but I think as a region, Southern Africa is going the right way, definitely.
And I just want to... Sorry, Terry.
I'd just like to point out on South Africa's relations with Angola, with Uganda. One of our former ambassadors there was John Kwalani, who was appointed shortly after he made quite a stir with some controversial things that he'd written precisely about this issue, and was sent to Uganda at a time when it was in the spotlight for its stance on these things. There seemed to be a sort of matching of minds there, which
I think
sent a particularly strange message.
Kwalani's column was entitled "Call Me Names, but Gay is Not Okay." I think.
Okay.
I think that's what
sure. So that's not a good sign. So I just want to flag to our viewers that Gerbrandt has been working on quite a serious overview of LGBT rights in sub-Saharan Africa. It's subtitled "Perspectives on the Region from the Region." There'll be a media launch, and he'll be releasing this document in a week or two, and it's something that we look forward to because I think it's a key issue. To some degree, I mean, it's an issue in itself, and to some degree, it's a sort of litmus test of tolerance more broadly in a society.
Yeah, and it was basically to kind of gauge what the grassroots level experiences are of the queer community in other African countries, because it's not always so clear cut as the media portrays it. And then I'll just mention briefly one of the findings. So my research required me to interview a number of people from different African countries, and I spoke to a person from Eswatini, and he said that Eswatini is because it's one of the few absolute monarchies in the world still left. It's a very cultural, very traditional country, and the problem there in Eswatini is homosexuality is considered to be completely opposed to Swazi culture. Like you can't be gay and Swazi at the same time. And so he was of the opinion that international organizations and human rights groups need to tread very lightly when they try to approach Eswatini in terms terms of, making the country more progressive towards these matters, because it could be interpreted, as I mentioned before,
Western
that it's
imperial
Western
encroachment
imperialism.
into our authentic.
So he suggested
Wait.
actually that change should come within from in his country. A local LGBT group there is called the Rock of Hope, and he believes that international human rights groups should try to play a supporting role for the Rock of Hope, but it should be the Rock of Hope's main goal, or they should be the main or the leader in terms of pushing for gay rights in that country, because then it grows organically.
Yeah.
In Eswatini, and he just concluded saying, that bridging that gap, making it clear that you can be proudly Swazi, and also openly gay is it can work,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good work to do, and the people to do it are going to be Swazis from outside. All we can do is offer some support, draw attention to the good work being done, draw attention to the encroachments on human rights and the human rights abuses that are happening there. I think let's go from that to a sort of something in the international arena or the domestic arena where we are playing a leading role, and I think we really have over the last 2 years, and where similarly it is up to South Africans to lead the charge, and we are very happy with international viewers who then lend some support, but we really have to lead the charge. And of course I'm talking about property rights. Institute of Race Relations, and particularly Terence Corrigan, have been tireless at scrutinizing every sort of moment in the political arena, every policy document about this, every speech, and drawing attention to those rays of sunshine, those little bits of hope, and drawing attention to the dire warnings, the red flags that sort of abound. And so, Terence, it's been a somewhat eventful little period for that recently.
Yeah.
Please talk us through that.
Well, essentially, there seems to be a disjuncture in thinking between, let's say, the ANC's old guard. If you go back to its leadership in the late 1990s and the Mbeki era, if you like, and what's come subsequently. I think this has been thrown into quite sharp relief by comments made by former President Kgalema Motlanthe. He was speaking at a conference of real estate agents last week, and he was absolutely scathing in his indictment of government policy. He says that government has never actually taken this issue seriously. They have no intention of following through, even with the EWC stuff. He says that it's been rigged to enable the department to keep a stranglehold on the nominal beneficiaries of the policy. Now, he's spoken out very strongly about the need for property rights to be expanded. All quite interesting, given that this was the same guy as ANC Secretary General said workers must intensively hate capitalism. He seems to have
People are complex to it.
People are complicated. And
very much indeed. So and while he's saying this, question time comes in Parliament, and you talk about red flags. I mean, we can also talk about red berets. One of them says that they're deeply concerned about these scurrilous remarks being made by certain former heads of state, and they want assurance that actually, we're going to be wrecking property rights. And up comes our deputy president and says, "Oh, no, don't worry, we're going ahead with this. Absolutely no.
We're going to detonate the bomb."
Yes. So there certainly does seem to be multiple schools of thought. And I've said this in previous pieces that, in a way, Motlanthe, I think, embodies a voice of pragmatism. Also, I think somebody who has had the not inconsiderable burden of running the country, even if it was for a short period, but who was also the head of Parliament's panel on transformative legislation. This was another remark he made, is that he's convinced most parliamentarians haven't bothered to read his report.
Yeah.
And, there are certainly some recommendations that we in this place would take issue with. But it can't be gainsaid that it was actually an in-depth project worth reading. And what he said is that, or rather what the report said was that these are the problems. It's not compensation. It's not Section 25 of the Constitution. The implication being, well, if all you fixate on is the ideologically pleasing objective of expropriation without compensation, you do great damage to the economy, but you don't actually come anywhere closer to the resolution of the problem that you're nominally trying to solve, which is a kind of dog and pony show in the policy arena. Marx once said that history repeats itself first as tragedy and then as farce. I think that there's a very strong element of this. We've seen what degraded property protections look like, and it's tragic. Now that we kind of understand it, the idea seems to be, well, let's do it all again.
Yeah, yeah.
It is quite extraordinary at times that you can have people in government referring back to what was done pre-1994 with some sort of approval. Well, if they could do it, we can, as though that's the standard you should follow.
It is an absurd thing. I mean, I heard Sihle Ngubesi, Big Daddy Liberty, once on SAFM, having a midnight interview with an SAFM presenter. Sort of sounds very American.
I know that guy.
And he was, and Sihle was making the argument for property rights and against race quotas, and this guy said, "But hold on, this is this is what the Afrikaners did, and look how well it worked out for them.
Did?
We have to do the same thing just for black people now." And one felt a rip in the fabric of society and space-time. Yeah, but so I think it is interesting, that metaphor of first tragedy and then farce. I mean, I was thinking over the weekend, when some of this was coming up, Judge Edward Cameron swan song judgment to the Constitutional Court, in which he basically said the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform is one of the most sinful entities in this country. We all know very well, and it's become very fashionable to sort of know some of the ins and outs of SARS, and it's the great catastrophe at SARS. But there's something striking to me about how easily we toss off the failures and the throttling of free enterprise and of very vulnerable people by the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform. And I really think from an elite urban and suburban point of view that a lot of it comes down to out of sight, out of mind. It's just so easy not to think about the 20 million South Africans that are living on government-owned land because it won't give up the title deeds. Because sometimes it's too incompetent to be able to do so, and sometimes it deliberately doesn't want to do so, and sometimes it's getting in bed with the wrong chief in order to make the wrong kind of deal.
There's we've recently seen the Rokase judgment, where this chap's been trying to take possession of his farm for 17 years. I think it's about 2003. I think the government initially said that they would sell it to him. The wheels just ground on for another 10 years before the minister took the decision actually not to sell it, but didn't bother to communicate it to him. It's what's really reminds me of is times on a Sunday morning you'll see people who have been worshipping at Bacchus's altar rather too enthusiastically the night before have sort of knocked over a street lamp, and it's still sort of going through the motions.
Yeah,
that is pretty much that sums up, I think, a lot of what our land policy is.
Broken traffic lights.
Broken traffic lights.
Red, orange, and green at the same time.
Yeah, and we'll enforce it or ignore it as the humour strikes.
Well, okay, from that pretty picture that you've just painted in our minds to a sort of another picture which I don't think anyone could fairly describe as pretty, but that certainly has been on the minds of a lot of South Africans. I'm not sure that we know the name of the student, but certainly the newspapers refer to him as the Kuro art student.
Mr. X.
Mr. X, we'll call him, produced a matric body of work, of artwork, at a Kuro school, and a parent took umbrage with it, found it religiously offensive, then took the world sort of on a tour through this art exhibition or this art installation, and content-wise looks like pictures, a lot of Jesus, a lot of iconic Christian images, but where instead of Jesus as you're used to seeing him, you have Ronald McDonald, and some that take it a step further. So you've got sort of the Mona Lisa Final Supper rehash, and you've got Michelangelo's God's creation of man with Adam rehashed. But then you also have, or riff, then you also have sort of Jesus' belly being ripped open and some satanic figure next to him, and you have Jesus engaging in what looks like an oop monsoon, a deep throat kiss to be with Ronald McDonald. And I think that is that's striking and surely intended to strike a nerve. But there's a debate to be had here around whether the right or wrong thing to do was for the school to allow this in the first place to go up, and then in the second place to bring it down. After the complaints, my understanding is that the school did bring that exhibition down. I don't know where we want to start. Shall we start with eeny, meeny, miny, mo between Terence and Marius?
Well, I'll start then. Terence is the resident theologian, can tell me why my argument's wrong.
Very good. That sounds like a good approach.
So, but just to apparently this parent that complained is actually a pastor in a church. So he's obviously a very devout Christian man, I'm assuming. So as you said, apparently this exhibition has been taken down. But some people have said this is actually it's a free speech issue, which I actually don't think it is, because free speech doesn't extend to your private property or to private property, and the school is private property. They can say you can't. They can say you're not allowed to say, I don't know, bum on property, and you'd have to agree with that.
Okay,
you know?
Or to be more realistic, there are plenty of swear words that are more offensive that a school might say are forbidden.
But now the issue is, so the school saw this exhibition, and the school is actually apparently, it's ostensibly a Christian school. Their motto is to God the glory or something. Yeah. So the school allowed this thing to go ahead, and then this parent came and he complained, and it was taken down. So, but now that's the issue. The school didn't actually have a problem with this artwork. They only took it down not because of principles or because of a commitment to Christianity, but because of fear of the mob, and that's actually the problem. So, I actually don't have a problem with the school said it should be taken down because they're Christian schools, they're private property. They can say it's offensive to Christians, cool, whatever. But they let it go. It was put up in the first place, so the school actually inherently didn't have a problem with that artwork. It's only when they were scared of the possible right-wing Christian mob that was going to come with pitchforks and burn the school down that they decided to put it down. So apologies to all right-wing Christians, including my friend Terence.
Terence, tell us some more.
Okay, well, I think there's a few issues that are mashed up here. I think the reason why this has taken the particular form of it has as a free speech issue and whatever is because this pastor had this not badly produced little home video made of him going through and talking about.
It is quite smart.
Look at
play between the camera. And
look at this, look at that, and I want to say that on a technical level, I think that kid definitely has a great deal of talent.
Yeah.
But watching it carefully, I will come to a conditional defense that he didn't call for any kind of state intervention or censorship. He said we need to protest this. He was calling other South Africans to express themselves, and it seems to me essentially this is what we would call the battle of ideas. As Marius said, this is within an institution that has its own set of rules. It is rather mind-boggling, though, that a school that has this worldview would allow this sort of art project to be undertaken. I mean, as a father and also as someone with religious convictions, my wife and I had to think very hard about what education we wanted for our child, and I was very, very attracted to a faith-based school, on the understanding that would be the worldview that he would be that he would be exposed to. Now, I also had to think, that by definition means that there's certain things that are likely to be off the table. If indeed he had gone that route, I mean, I would probably also be fairly upset with something that seems to ridicule or mock the faith. If one voluntarily submits to a particular organization, then there's a certain internal discipline that you should have a reasonable expectation of abiding by. If this had been at a state school, I think it would be a very, very different matter. What I do think, though, does come out of this, which I think slightly veers off the set of facts at hand, is the idea: do people have the right to have their beliefs respected? This is not. Pierre de Force wrote a piece on the Daily Maverick where he sort of poo-pooed this idea, which I do too in principle. But there is actually something that bills itself as an international human rights instrument, which I believe is actually recognized by the UN, which came out of the old organization of the Islamic Conference. I'm not sure what it calls itself these days, on on human rights in Islam. And from that, there is also a resolution that they've taken to the Human Rights Council, which I think South Africa has actually voted in favor of, on the question of defamation of religions, where they regard insulting a prophet or whatever as an extreme human rights violation.
Yeah.
I have major problems with that. Once again, I'll go back to Karl Marx. Now, please don't take this as any kind of indication of my ideological positioning.
Our
But
readers can see the cross through the hammer and sickle behind Terence.
Right, there we go.
And please take this in the context of that.
He said something to the effect of the beginning of all criticism of religion is the beginning of all criticism, or words to that effect. In other words, if
He did say,
if your metaphysical or esoteric or spiritual ideas are beyond any criticism, it was very difficult to criticize anything else.
Yeah.
But I think that it behooves us just to pause for a minute. You know, there's been a lot of mockery directed at this hitherto little known, at least outside his community, pastor. He didn't call for any kind of state censorship. He didn't threaten anyone with violence. He called for a protest.
Yeah, this idea of the pitchforks is totally created by Marius, I think, is one of the important points.
But
I just watched the video. He's quite.
Let us remember though, the Mail and Guardian, a great apostle of secularism, of progressivism, published a Zapiro also a great apostle of progressivism. A reasonably, by the standards of what goes around the cartooning world, innocuous cartoon of the Muslim prophet Muhammad lying on a couch, and there were physical threats to them, but the Mail and Guardian ultimately backed down and committed not to running such a cartoon again. In fact, the editor at the time then tried to dress this up as being a uniquely South African solution because they understand the trauma that this causes, etc., 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 which I find a lot more disturbing than the concerns of an ordinary member of the public. In fact, let me take this one step further. As journalists or knowledge workers or whatever, it seems to me that you should be deeply, deeply invested in free speech and free belief and free expression. I'm not seeing a great deal of that. Remember the flag ban, the virtual unanimous endorsement of that. Yeah. The Mail and Guardian with imagery of Muhammad.
And that flag ban, just to point out, is very much, the argument made by Tendeka and Kaiboti was very much that we want to impose this ban. There was, I was there in the case in the court, and the judge was making some offering, it seemed, for a more reasonable interpretation of the argument, so that it would pay some heedance to property rights and the privacy that comes with it. And to give a concrete example, which they were using in court, are you allowed to hang the flag in your own personal toilet? And Kaiboti said, absolutely not. We are arguing that even there, the flag may not be hung. And the ruling is entirely consistent with that call.
No, see what I think we have to point out here is the way many of the pastor's critics have phrased this is, well, what about freedom and freedom of expression? Question maybe we have to answer is everyone in favor of freedom of expression? Is it something we can assume? I would say not. I would say a lot of public debate around this now, including from people in the media and academia who you would expect to be intuitively in favor of it, is about drawing lines and restricting, and we can I've said personally, and I suppose this is where the resident theologian comes in. If I saw this display, I'd probably be a little bit personally turned off.
Yeah.
The great thing is though that I can in a free society, I can then go home and watch Charlton Heston play the Ten Commandments, which was a brilliant movie, by the way.
It is a great movie.
Absolutely no. I don't have to go and look at this thing. Or I can do what this guy says and go and protest out and say, well, I'm fully in favor of you having whatever freedom of speech you want, but in this institution, I would like us to adhere towards a set of rules. Though I would say that even in those situations, and I'm going to quote Benjamin Franklin: when offered a choice between security and liberty, you choose liberty. So if I hadn't enrolled a child in that school, and I had done it in the expectation that they're going to get a solid Christian education, my instinct would be to say, although I maybe have some serious moral problems with this, I would rather not make an issue of it, because I do not want to create an environment in which the exchange of knowledge and the learning experience is then constrained.
Yeah.
That would be my response.
Okay, that's quite sophisticated.
There's also been been big Streisand effect here, because if this fellow hadn't filmed this thing, nobody in South Africa would have heard about this except the kids and people at Richards Bay.
He spread the offence.
Exactly. Now everybody's heard about
taking
it.
offence.
Yeah.
That's basically what I wanted to add, was the school actually, it was against the rules to take photos or video of the exhibition out of fear that some of the content or all of the content there can be taken out of context.
Yeah.
You never know. Maybe during the art gallery opening, the artists were there explaining their artwork. Maybe there were little pamphlets or notes saying, this is actually...
Just on that point, the young man or young woman, Mr. or Miss X, who did this thing, they said that this was talking about the commodification of, or saying how what's the word I'm looking for? Commercialization and materialism is the new religion, and that's why this person made Ronald McDonald there instead of Jesus. So that's, with that explained, then it makes much more sense.
Well, okay, so
personally, I like Ronald McDonald, by the way.
We all like him.
Okay, so I think one of the things that's interesting about this debate is that the artistic moment is found at the intersection between four distinct but very deeply important values. One is freedom of expression. And there are people who are more or less into freedom of expression, and I like your point a lot, Terence, that we all like to pretend that we're always into freedom of speech, but it's much harder to be into freedom of speech when it's speech that you don't like, and that's a good time to test how far you're really into it. There's another point, which is religion, and we all, I think, at least pretend to believe, and I think mostly we do actually believe, that every person must have the right to have their own faith, and that
or lack of faith,
and the idea of mind police, the idea of that this is really responsible for so many centuries of the worst kinds of backward human behavior. So we really have to give each other that space, and that does come with respect. Then there's private property, which has its, when you've got private property, you've got the sense of privacy, you've got the sense of dominion. I can do here what I want. How does that clash with these other two things? And then the fourth thing, and something that I don't think has gotten as much traction, is the idea of art, the value of art itself. Now, I was an art critic before I became an IRR person, I suppose. And
you stepped down in the world.
I really came down. But I will say, I didn't need that explanation. When I saw it, it immediately struck me that the school had a very good argument for why it kept the work up, or why it put the work up in the first place. And that argument is then laid out by the student, who unsurprisingly has won all kinds of prizes, and I think is setting himself up for a fabulous art career, genuinely. He couldn't have hoped for a better start. And you look at the technique, you look at the response, it's fabulous. Yeah. And you look at the rationale, and that rationale would have been produced before the outrage as part of the matric art process. And I've opened matric art exhibitions myself, and so I've seen sort of some of the arduous paperwork that these kids are pulled through, and he's clearly a very eloquent chap, and the argument that he makes, as you say, is that I'm not going against Jesus Christ here. I'm not going against spirituality or religion or the Christian religion. What I'm really going against is the defamation of that religion by those who claim its name. And so he sort of seems to see himself in a way as a disciple, at least, if not of Christianity in a narrow sense, perhaps of Christianity in a more abstract metaphysical sense. And I think that the school art teacher is someone to bear in mind, because that's probably the person who's really taking the heat and the rap for this right now.
Yeah.
And I'm quite certain that in the boardrooms with the headmasters and the teachers, various representatives, and the minister of Lesotho is always around the corner.
This is outside of his
Yeah, but don't
So
underestimate Mr. Lesotho. I'm sure he's already
He's got
the ground
legs.
down to Durban.
And I'm quite certain that the argument that's being made is that we didn't think that this was this only appears to be offensive to the faith. In fact, at a deep and profound level, it's exactly the opposite. It's a great bulwark defense against those false prophets who aim to commercialize Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not saying that that's a watertight argument, but I do want to make this point. I think it's an interesting argument, and I think everything that we've said is interesting, and the WhatsApp group and the sort of office chats about it and most of what I've seen in the press has actually been quite good. I think this is the kind of controversy, this is the kind of scandal we could have every month of the year and we'd be fine. This is not the kind of problem that lets you think that society is ripping itself to shreds. When you've got people saying the only way for us to economically go forward is to undermine property rights, that's a crisis of society. When you've got people saying, look, we want to kill the queers, and then South Africa sends the kind of ambassador who sort of seems on side with that, that's a crisis in society. I think that this is actually a healthy thing to talk about, and I've got to say a word for that pastor. I think he did make quite a wholehearted appeal to address the issue, and he took pains to repeatedly say that he loves the school and he loves the teachers who took care of his children for a very long time. And I think mens rea is this sort of legal term for evil intent or harmful intent or sadistic intent. And there's so little of that in this whole thing that I find it a refreshing discussion.
Can I say one other point? The intention behind it. I've heard this again and again. Well, maybe he didn't mean that, and not just about this, but in many contentious situations. If we are going to defend free speech as a principle, then surely that is almost irrelevant. There was a case in Canada some years ago where a magazine publisher was hauled before one of the human rights commissions on the basis that he had published an article that was supposedly Islamophobic, and he actually took a camera, not unlike what we have here, into the questioning session, which I think they were completely unprepared for. And one of the questions from his interrogator was, well, what was your intention? He said, you have to assume my intention was the worst that you can imagine. Judge me by my actions. Don't look inside my head and say, oh, it would be okay if this is what you meant and that not okay. No, if we are going to defend this robustly, then we have to be willing to cast the net wider.
Right, well, so I think that's why, and the Equality Court does generally make this provision, including for the flag. So the last time I saw the apartheid flag was after the ruling. It was in Sandton, in the most public part of Sandton, the Sandton Convention Centre. There was Ayanda Mabula, possibly the most famous living South African painter, possibly the greatest as well, it's an arguable point, carrying a Kalashnikov AK-47 and an old apartheid-era flag and jumping on a box and looking for things to set on fire before the security guard dragged him out for doing this unauthorized work of performance art. And he is entirely protected under our law, because our law says that if it's a work of art, then you can't, it's neither here nor there. There's no defamation case to be brought. You can say any words you want to say. All of the usual legal principles go away. And I think part of the reason is that art explores the very nether regions of intention and interpretation, where all interpretations really are open to the viewer to make, and all intentions are therefore open to be imputed onto the artist. And it's precisely because it's so open-ended that we treat it differently to the written word and so on. But I think, guys, it's a Friday. And it's been a long show. So
it's a good one.
Let's say good luck to the Springboks for Sunday.
Okay, well, guys, we've had a good week. It's been a mad week, and we've managed to not talk about the DA on our Friday show.
You couldn't hold back, could you? You couldn't hold back.
But listen to our podcast.
And really, if you like what we do, SMS 32823. We'll give you a call. We'll tell you how to support classical liberalism. It's a kind of juice that we inject into society, and everything grows and becomes stronger and better, hopefully, after we've done it. And it's like nitrous oxide for your engine. Have a good day. Thank you very much.